Ladies and gentlemen, I find it interesting. I find it interesting how I'll make a statement and then later on I'll be proven correct. And then people will pretend like I didn't make the statement, despite the fact that I made the statement. Now, when it comes to law enforcement in the United States, what I've noticed is a consistent pattern in which right wingers in particular, they will support the police. And yet, when it comes to the police doing things that they don't care for, then suddenly you will see something that is very, very weird. It's a very weird transition. It's almost like Professor Xavier from the X-Men used his mutant mind powers to change the minds of these right wingers when it comes to the police going after someone that they particularly care for. Now, with that being said, what I've noticed from the political right in the past week or so, week and a half or so, is indicative of everything that I've been saying about them for some years now. In that they only care about oppression, they only care about police and law enforcement abuse and judicial abuse when it comes to someone going after their figureheads. When it comes to someone like, for example, Mike Brown, when it comes to Trayvon Martin, when it comes to actually Daniel Shaver, I'm not even going to use the race issue, Daniel Shaver, Tony Tempa, American citizens, what I've noticed is that there's a consistent pattern in which the political right, they become almost like Robocop fanboys. You ever seen that movie, Robocop? You ever played the game? Ever seen the actual trilogy and everything else? Robocop is every bit indicative of everything that's wrong with U.S. law enforcement. Shoot first and ask questions later. But that figure, just like Dirty Harry, was praised by the political right, was loved by the political right. Because there's an image of police and law enforcement that the political right has that is not only unrealistic, but it's based in propaganda. Just like right now, there's people who still watch Law and Order SVU, even though Law and Order even though the actual SVU is being investigated by the Department of Justice for covering up the very crimes they are supposed to be investigating. Yeah, that's happening right now, and many people still watch those reruns every day, and they still believe those Olivia Brunson stories. They still believe those stories. Those Ice-T stories, they still believe them. Pro Black 60 says 100% reparations for financial Black Americans. Absolutely. I agree with that. But back to the main point, definitely put that out there for sure. If you want to comment on that, definitely, I want to give you a follow for that. Make sure you follow them. Give them a follow. If I see you making good comments, I'm going to tell people to go ahead and follow you. But when it comes to police officers, I've noticed a consistent pattern. The political right, they are the James Harden of politics. That's what I've noticed. They are the James Harden of politics. Let me give you an example, right? James Harden is a basketball player in the NBA. And just like James Harden, the political right, they always pump fake when it comes to support. Pump faking. You see a lot of pump faking when it comes to the political right and their support of the police. A lot of pump faking because it's not real legitimate support. It never was. Because if you look at how they feel about the Second Amendment, how could the political right have ever supported police? So a lot of the support, it wasn't really support of the police. It was malcontent towards other communities. See, many people who are Republican, who happen to be white, they see the police as a bulwark, as a buffer against us. Usually foundational Black Americans, but other groups too. That's how the dominant white society sees the police. They don't see them as protectors or guardians or public servants. They see them as more of buffers and bulwarks to make sure that white supremacy is maintained. See? So that's what I mean by pump faking. And much like James Harden, the political right, who is the James Harden of politics, they do a lot of head fakes and hesitations. You will notice that they will hesitate to give their outright support of police whenever it comes time for legislation in towards gun rights. A lot of head fakes, a lot of hesitations, a lot of hezzies, man. You ain't never seen so many hezzies in all your life, man. You know, when Donald Trump banned bump stocks, right? You notice that there were police across the country who were, confiscating bump stocks. And you had people out there still supporting police, still supporting, everything else. And that's my problem, right? That is the problem that I have with that. How in the world can you have a scenario in which you're talking about, I'm going to protect my Second Amendment rights, and yet when it comes time to look at the people who are going to infringe upon your Second Amendment rights, like they have in California and Washington State, in Nevada, as they've done in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, you name it, they've done it all over the country. How can you sit there, right, and talk about how you're going to protect your rights, and yet the very people who are charged with infringing upon your rights, the first people who are going to do it and then use the justification of, well, it's just the law. I'm just obeying the law. I'm just enforcing the law. How can you talk about you loving liberty? And yeah, it might be very different locations, but the results are just the same. We know where Philando Castile was. We know where so many other black men who had legal firearms were, and we saw how they were treated. Right? So with that being said, I have an issue when people go out of their way to pump fake and lie about what their true intentions are when they say they support the police. I don't understand why is it that people just can't be honest about that. If you have a problem with my people, then just say that. If you got a problem with certain neighborhoods, then just say that. But don't come at me with a bunch of pump faking saying, well, it's about law and order and I just want a good country and everything else. That's not the issue, right? That's not your argument. Because if that were your argument, I wouldn't see FBI bulletins right now talking about right wingers. If that were the case. If all of your support is now contingent upon someone who you call a figure being rated or not, that lets me know that your support was never there in the first place. And Pilot Pat, it doesn't matter if you support federal levels of law enforcement or not. Your state and local police support federal laws. There's people who are still locked up over a plan. And now that I've said that, right, I want you to directly address that. Don't talk around that. State and local law enforcement enforce that. Even though most Americans don't agree with that. Don't say, well, blame the politicians, because I'm gonna flip that back on you when it comes to the FBI raid. Blame the politicians. Don't blame the FBI. Now, I don't like the FBI, right? But my problem is that if you're going to support or not support something, then be consistent with it. You're not going to be wishy-washy with me. Because if I call somebody an ally or an accomplice or okay, Pilot Pat, you got to go. Sorry. No. Because the one thing that I can't tolerate is people being inconsistent. You got to be consistent. If you want my support, if you want me to listen to you, you want me to have a conversation, that's cool. I'm glad to actually do it. But what you cannot do is ignore things that I'm presenting to you just because you don't like it or talk around it. No, you will directly address it. Yes, you will. Those are the rules on my channel. You can not like it or not like it, but that's what it is. Because when you bring up a point and people start talking around it or start trolling, it's very annoying. And when something is annoying, I ain't got to tolerate it. And, usually when a black man says that, suddenly people start saying, oh, you just shutting down the debate. Yeah. That part of it, yeah. Yeah. ACAB, you know what ACAB stands for. You can Google it. But I'm talking about police officers. Obviously, if you Google that term, you can probably find. So I need my mods to make sure you're dealing with these people who make several accounts. So you're a Trump supporter? No, I'm not. It doesn't matter if you just came in. You can still Google the term. You know what you're doing. Stop it. Motivation says you're a Trump supporter? No, not a Trump supporter. Not a Biden supporter. Don't care for either one of them because they both support the police. And anybody who supports the police, I can't rock with. That's just what it is. And I've been trying to tell the political right for the longest time to stop with the bootlicking that I've been seeing. But overall, when it comes to support of the police, I'm finding that these people have less and less reasons to actually support the police and more reasons to just be racist. Paul Johnson says, who pays reparations to European slaves? The European countries? That's the direct answer. Now, we're talking about slavery that happened on these lands. Don't bring up any other lands. These lands. And if you mention Irish slaves, I'm going to kick you. Bearzilla says, I work in corrections, but for a law enforcement agency. That's your thing, man. I'm not going to jump down your throat, Pro Black says, but Bearzilla, how do I ban on mute people, though I haven't been in the mod in a long time? Oh, it is. I am not. I answer your question. We're talking about what happened here in America. I don't care about what happened in Europe. Not my problem. Like, why is it that every time I mention reparations, right? People start mentioning everything from outer space that right here. User says cops treat everyone equally. Just saying color has nothing to do with it. That's not what the studies are saying. I'm not saying that there are no people who are white who are mistreated by cops. I'm just saying that there's a disproportionate amount of excessive force that is used against black folks in particular. In other groups too, but particularly black folks. John B says, is slavery still an issue in America? Yes, 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment literally allows it. If you go read it, it literally says it. Literally says it. Word for word. Pro Black says the problem is white people love to deflect. I wouldn't say this just white people, but a lot of people. Paul John says there are more European slaves brought to the USA than Africa. Paul. I'm going to give you one more opportunity, right? One more opportunity. Paul, you're trolling. I want to assume that you're not trolling, but I'm assuming you are at this point. Okay. Yeah, Paul, you're not educated on this, buddy. See, you see how when I talk about police officers, right? They suddenly come in with all the arguments that make no sense about other subjects. Clearly, you can see the title of the stream, right? Clearly, right? Now, I know I answered the question in the intro, but you can just answer the question, right? Willie Duke says that was the statement. The cops are the dirtiest human because he could have mercy, but don't. Absolutely, absolutely. How you doing, sister? I know you could listen. Can you guys stop coming in on this stock accounts? It's not a good look. So, Razzle C says indentured servitude is not the same as chattel slavery. It's not. It's not. And I think these people know that. These people know that, but they have to deflect because when you look into the history of their people, what you're going to find is that there is a specific lineage of oppression. You look at the history of our people, we've been the victims of white supremacy, systemic white supremacy at that. How you doing? How you doing? Love to everybody who's watching, but I find it interesting how the political right, who understands that police are based on the slave patrol, are now going at law enforcement. And they want black people who have been going at law enforcement for different reasons, trying to protect people, trying to get people justice. Now they want us to go at law enforcement because their dear leader has been targeted. Excuse me. I don't care. That's got nothing to do with my people. That's got nothing to do with foundational Black Americans. That's got nothing to do with ACAB. That's got nothing to do with the overall movement and approach. That's got nothing to do with us. We don't care as foundational Black Americans as to your dear leader being raided by the FBI, because many people around the country, especially Black folks, have been raided by the FBI. That is not our problem, not our concern, not our issue. Because when Breonna Taylor was raided, right, where was all the support for Breonna Taylor? Where was Donald Trump when Breonna Taylor was being raided, when those police officers were lying? Where was he then? And now you want me to care that he got raided by the FBI? Yeah, I agree. FBI raids are usually nonsense. I agree. But when our people get raided by the FBI, where is all this support? Where is all this vitriol? Where is all this energy? Right? Where is all this energy when we need the help? You want us to go to the front lines and be the mules so that we can work and we can protest and we can get attacked by police officers and picket lines and everything else. But now, right, back then, when we needed you to do the exact same thing for us, what did you say? You said, just obey the law. You said, just obey the law. That's what you said. Just obey the law. And that's my problem when it comes to people who expect for me just to jump off, right? Jump off and just jump down people's throats. Christina, I see you in the chat. So here's my issue. It was mute the media. I understand you're really associated with the person, and this whole pushing the get out and listen, the whole thing with Black people. I've gotten a little bit annoyed with that. You know, when I put out a certain message, I've seen certain allies who are allied with other people that they know are doing this. Because mute the media, that dude came at me hardcore, personally, because I didn't want to vote Democrat. And I'm like, excuse me, I just watched Joe Biden just say, I think we can all agree that we shouldn't defund the police. We should fund the police. And when I put that out there, I just noticed that there was this indifference. And anybody who was associated with that guy, I couldn't mess with him. Wasn't nothing personal. I didn't say anything to you negatively. I didn't say anything negative about you. But I know that if I put out that content, what's going to happen to me? So, you know, I just got tired of people always dictating to me, right, and my people how we should think. I had to tell mute the media, excuse me, I sat there and I watched Bill Clinton, because again, I was born in 86. So I watched Bill Clinton, I watched Barack Obama, you know, I watched, you know, George Bush, I watched Donald Trump, and now I'm watching Joe Biden all in my lifetime. Qualified immunity is not gone. People aren't being heard, right? And whenever I try to mention that we are foundational Black Americans and we are a separate lineage group, I've had people on your side come at me over that, which is so disrespectful and racist. And I'm like, okay, had they just backed up a little bit, maybe I wouldn't go so hardcore. But you couldn't even give off little stuff, man. Well, yes, mute the media, that whole side. They have cliques and gangs that go around on people's lives and attack people. Yeah. They do this. And I remember I've been on several lives, right? And then I'll talk about FBAs, and then they'll start attacking me. And they'll be like cliques. And I've seen you in those lives. I've seen you there. Now, I don't know if you knew what was happening, but I assume that you did.
So that's my thing. Like it's just like that dude had way too much power and influence, right? When it came to the black community, when it came to everything else, and they were trying to convince me, right, to kind of change my mind with foundational black Americans, or change my mind when it came to reparations, or change my mind when it came to support with Joe Biden. I don't understand if people understand this, but we're not voting, right? We are not voting for anybody or supporting anybody if they're not talking about tangibles for foundational black Americans. And the second that I say that, I get jumped down, man. It wasn't anything personal. It just I had to, if I saw anybody who was a part of that clique or a part of that circle, I couldn't mess with them. And it's not anything personal. I'm just tired of being lectured to. We spent 400 years being lectured to. We good. Have you not seen what's been happening on Black Twitter, on Black TikTok, on Black YouTube? We've been blowing up lately. Going wild lately. And that's my problem. It's like it seems like the more I get in touch with who I am, and the more I support foundational black Americans, right? It seems like um the more that I push for that, right? The more I get pushback. And sometimes even from my own people, even within FBA ranks, I've gotten pushback. So even there, the standards are high. To some people within even FBA circles, I'm still not good enough. Which lets you know we are checking paperwork. We are not taking disrespect. We are not taking anyone dictating to us or lecturing to us about voting, about who we are, about reparations, about the police, about any of that stuff. We are tired of being dictated to. And mute the media, Christina, I know you were associated with them, unless I got the wrong Christina, but you look similar. You know, the producer. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. But it looked like the same person, so it's just like my issue is that I've noticed certain clicks, right? And these clicks, I've noticed they only pop up when I got big. They weren't around when I was smaller. They are now jumping at me now that I'm being noticed by the mainstream media. Now that I'm being interviewed by the mainstream media for I don't know how many times now. Now that I'm being noticed by law enforcement. Now I've been noticed by all these people. Now all of a sudden they're attacking me. People are coming out of the woodwork. You got a non-black a non-black girlfriend. It's like you're coming up with the most cornball, ridiculous excuses to attack somebody. Seriously? It's just like it's amazing to me. Amazing to me how these people weren't around when I was coming up. But now all of a sudden, right? Now all of a sudden, they're around all the time. Now all of a sudden they want me to defund the police. They want me to they want to jump on the whole defund the police and defund the FBI bandwagon. Now they want me to support their political causes because now they see that I have real world power. And I don't want it. I don't like it. And that's why I am not known to be arrogant. I don't want the power. I don't want the power. And I'm going to go ahead and say it to you right now. My first marriage was to a black woman. Have a black child. FBA, both sides. Unfortunately, because of my personality type, I have a very short dating window.
Very short. And only a particular type of woman's gonna like me. When you're a cab devil and you're constantly being watched by cops and cops don't like you, there's never gonna be a time in which you're never gonna not be watched. So the person that I'm with is a court reporter, one of the top 5 in the whole state of Washington State, and she's non-black. The thing about it is that most women, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, or anything else, wouldn't be able to date me because of my personality. And I fully admit that. You know, I have very particular habits. I go full throttle into my work. Um, I I become obsessed with going after cops, and because of that, it has led to a very particular lifestyle. And most women in general can't adjust to that. They can't adjust to that. You know, I go to protests and I show up in front of cops' faces. I I can get if a woman doesn't want to deal with that. It's dangerous. Um, I have situations in which people will try to swat me. Um, a lot of women don't want to deal with that. Um, if you're a cab devil and you put out 6 to 8 videos about bad cop news every day, and you with a black woman, I understand why a lot of black women didn't want to date me. Um, but I obviously chose a black woman first because that's who I married first. You know. So I mean, it's just my thing is it's just I want people to realize that unfortunately because of what I do and the nature of what I do, it's forced me into certain positions that, you know, it is what it is. You know, I try to live a normal life, and I'll never be able to. There are things that have happened to me because of police that have changed my life, and I will never recover from. You know, I didn't realize how far they would go, how far they would go to silence me. You know, and people ask me why am I so gung ho about my opinions and my viewpoints and my videos and my content. It's because people have opinions all the time and they never sacrifice what I did. You know, I did a video recently. It's a woman named Aunt Lie on Twitter, but she was a probation officer in New Jersey, and so she was a law enforcement officer, and she had a lawsuit against the state of New Jersey, and she won the lawsuit. And after she won the lawsuit, they went after her nephew. And so I did her story, and I pinned her story on top of my profile for a while. And then I ran to some people from Secure the Tribe on Twitter, and I was telling them about her story. So she just texted me this morning. She said some people told her, you know, it's not all FBA. It's like freaking Secure the Tribe is like a very, very small part of FBA. It's like, I would say like 4% of it, really. Told her that her story wasn't real and that she was trying to profit off of it. You know. My thing is this: I've sacrificed a lot. I lost everything because I wanted to have an opinion about law enforcement. I lost everything. I lost things that people shouldn't lose. You know, I know I brought this up before, but my mom passed away in March, and I didn't get to see her funeral because police took a warrant out for my arrest. And so because of that, I didn't get to see my mom's funeral. I mean, the legal trouble is done now. They reversed it, of course, but that doesn't take back the fact that I didn't get to see it. And then when I put out content saying, questioning Joe Biden, like, hey, can we not fund the police? And people come in, it's like, oh, well, see, you got to think of it this way and that way. This is what I mean by you don't get to come at me like that, man. That's what I mean by that. No, it was one that they had just taken out for no reason. I hadn't been in the state for over 2 years. It was in South Carolina. Haven't seen my son in going on 3 years. I pay child support. But when you're a whistleblower, they will pull out all the stops, man. This is why I'm as angry and as eccentric as I am. And so it was for harassing a communications officer. It's a felony. And it was for, apparently I called South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and then I was like, I think I called them for I was trying to get a statement because of a news story that I was doing about the cop that had essayed a girl. So they took a warrant off my arrest for that. It was a warrant that was only enforceable in South Carolina. That's how you know it was nonsense. If I was so dangerous, why couldn't it be enforced here in Washington State? Right? Like, so like when I had ran across a Pierce County Sheriff's deputy, and I had gotten pulled over for like speeding, and so he had ran my ran the information. He told me about it. He said, I know who you are. And he says, even if this warrant was enforceable, I wouldn't do it. He says, because the second that I did, there'd be a riot. And I said, you're right. There would be. So when people say things like, maybe you should think differently of law enforcement, maybe you should spend time talking about some of the stories that I talk about. You heard me mention Leon Lott several times, then go after the man. You heard me mention some of the corruption, go after the man. How you want to change my mind when I ain't seen my own mother's funeral because of law enforcement? How you want me to change my mind when I was telling the truth about law enforcement and they then turn around and try to lie about me? And there's so many other officers whose stories are just like mine. Spend more time going after the people who are the problem versus people like me who are complaining. Stop trying to appease me. You're not going to. Situation with me is too extreme. You have to concede that. You have to concede that. This is why I take special care in doing stories about whistleblowers. Like you want to know why I go out of my way to show the stories of whistleblowers? That's why. Because those stories are typically shoved under the rug. Those stories are typically lied about, and those stories are typically memory hold by the media. So my problem with the modern day police officer is that they will spend incessant time trying to convince me that not all cops are bad, versus going after the cops that I'm telling you aren't good. Aren't good. You could be a good person and be a cop, but there are no good cops, in my opinion. And here's why. There's not a single state or territory in which there is a law in which people agree with. And there's always a state or territory that actually has a law that you don't agree with that someone could be arrested for. And if that's the case, right,
how can you say there are good cops? If there are good cops, there'll be a lot more riots, and it'd be cops leading it. If there were good cops, right, they would have an issue with the freaking Patriot Act. If there were good cops, they would have went to the FBI field office and say, hey, stop enforcing the Patriot Act. It infringes upon the rights of American citizens. If there were good cops, they would surround Edward Snowden when he comes back to the States and protect him, right? If there were good cops. If there were good cops, right, they would have protected Chelsea Manning. If there were good cops. If there were good cops, right, they would go to the Catholic Church, they would go to the Southern Baptist Church, they would go to the Boy Scouts, and they would make sure there were no people there that shouldn't be around kids, right? If there were good cops. Because I've seen a whole lot of cops, a whole lot of deputies, a whole lot of troopers, a whole lot of state police and federal agents and federal law enforcement do a lot of vigilante work. A lot of fatal off-duty shootings. But I'm noticing that whenever a Boy Scout leader does something to a kid, you never see the same treatment, never see the same energy. It's a very, very weird phenomenon, right? If there were good cops, how in the world did Jeffrey Epstein operate with impunity for that long? If there were good cops. Yeah, so 700,000 to like what 1 million cops in this country? And one Epstein? But none of y'all can find him? But you can put false charges on people, right? You can obtain a false warrant to get a no-knock raid on Breonna on Breonna Taylor, though, huh? You can get false warrants, but you can't get legitimate ones against people that we know are guilty. But they're good cops. Listen. America is the third most populated country on planet Earth, right? On planet Earth. If you think that you being a good cop or you knowing a good cop or you knowing a good law enforcement officer suddenly means that the profession in of itself is a good profession, that's like suggesting that just because I find one positive Comcast customer service experience, that certainly Comcast customer service is the pinnacle of customer service. It don't work that way. It don't work that way. Cops are the only government job in which you can't criticize. It's the only government job that you can't criticize. You can't show me politicians can be criticized, right? The president can be, a judge can be, a park rangers are law enforcement, but you notice even they don't really get criticism like that. You can criticize a firefighter, a teacher who works for the state, a state-funded school. You criticize the DMV, criticize contractors. You can criticize people that the government contracts who are private citizens, but just not the government itself. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed that Jedi mind trick? How is it that it is more okay to criticize firefighters than police officers? How is it that it was ever more okay to criticize a teacher over a police officer? That I find that weird, don't you? Don't you? Because if I'm thinking to myself, how is it that you criticizing the teacher and yet failing to criticize, right, a police officer who has a firearm, who has qualified immunity, who many of them engage in no-knock raids that are based on false warrants? How is it that you can criticize one but not the other? I mean, people talk about teachers' unions and how they have so much power, right? Excuse me. Police unions are the most powerful on earth. There is no union more powerful than police unions. Seriously. You want to know how I can prove that just off jump? Police unions, every one of their members are guaranteed to be armed. That in of itself makes you the most powerful. But then the amount of pull they have in politics, the amount of pull they have on social media or even in popular culture with all the propaganda that you see on television, from Law and Order to the Chicago Shield. You got so many other shows that showcases sometimes the truth about cops, but oftentimes a fantasy about cops. And what I've noticed about the average everyday American, even some black folks, is that we tend to hold on to a fantasy even more so than the reality. Like you couldn't convince the average American that the the egg roll is not actually Chinese, right? You couldn't tell the average person hip hop didn't come from Jamaica; it came from right here. The Black Americans, the descendants of American slavery, we made that. But they want to always. It's a very very weird pattern how we want to live in a fantasy. We are given the facts, but we want to live in a fantasy. It's like we believe in a white Jesus. It's a fantasy. It's not real. But most people, when they think of Jesus, that's who they picture. Right? So we live in this fantasy. This fantasy, whereas it doesn't matter how much you've been shown a profession is corrupt, is inherently corrupt, and has a problem with corruption, right? They want to hold on to this fantasy because not addressing and avoidance of a problem is the mode of operation for many people. See, people ask me all the time, why am I so open? Why do I seem like I overshare? I'm very open because I'm honest. I don't live in a fantasy. I don't want you to believe something about me that's not true. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm some perfect angel. I'm not. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm some, I don't get angry. I do. I'm not gonna pretend like I don't cry. I do. I laugh, I cry. I'm a normal person. But some people out there, they live in a fantasy, and you can tell on social media who I'm talking about. They live in a fantasy. They live in a fantasy, whereas, police officers are actually serving and protecting people. Most times when you see cops, right, that's not what they're doing. Now, there could be some cops who absolutely fit that. Could be, absolutely. But that's not what you see most of the time. See, most people live in a fantasy where you think that most police calls are for violent crime, and yet only 4 to 6% of those are actually about for violent crime. That's reality, but the fantasy is Law and Order SVU. That's the fantasy. The propaganda. See, it's a fantasy when people think that police officers are just going out there and they need all this military gear because there are dangerous threats around every corner. That's the fantasy. The reality is a lot of the military gear that they're using, not only are they not qualified for, but vehicles such as MRAPs, right? That's an up armored vehicle that was found in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I actually drove one in Afghanistan. So the MRAP is a up armored vehicle that's made to resist IEDs and also to be bulletproof. They gave those to local police departments. Now, the Department of Defense flat out said you don't drive these on civilian roads unless you absolutely have to, because these things are so heavy that it's going to tear up roads. Well, they're tearing up roads with these right now. You got cops driving these things to McDonald's to get burgers. See, That's the problem that you're having right now. Because of the fantasy that people live in when it comes to police officers, we, the taxpayers, are paying for that. Because you want to live in a fantasy whereas you think that police officers deserve six figures, I got to pay for that now. Because you want to live in a freaking fantasy, whereas you think that police officers can't be accountable for every round that they fired. So now you think qualified immunity is a great thing. Well, now we the freaking taxpayers, we gotta pay for that now. Because of your fantasy. Because of your fantasy that you believe that police officers need military gear. Now we, the taxpayers, we gotta pay for that. That fantasy. I want tangibles and reparations for my people because we aren't living in a fantasy. But because because you want cops to live action role play, right? You want cops to live action role play and play soldier. You want me to pay for that. No, I don't want to pay for that. I want the American taxpayer to get their money back so that they can afford formula. I want the American taxpayer to get their money back so that they can pay for gas at the pump. I want the American taxpayer to get their money back so that they can afford childcare. I want the American taxpayer to get their money back so that they can go out and actually afford groceries. I don't care for us funding the police the way that we are. To be honest with you, I would do neighborhood patrols, armed patrols, train people, the same way you do the military. But I am tired of the American taxpayer being financially abused. If you are, I've said this many, many times. If you are the American taxpayer, you are financially abused. You pay more for your police force than some other countries pay for their defense. That is ridiculous. And you pay for that not just because of all the gear and all the salaries and all the pensions and all the benefits, but also because of the misconduct. Because in just misconduct settlements alone, you pay more than it costs to operate entire units to go to war. I've already proven that. So my problem is that you can't sit there and talk to me about freedom, talk about going against tyranny, talk about the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, or any amendment, or the Constitution in general, and talk about how you don't want the American government overtaxing the American people, and yet you support U.S. law enforcement. I'm sorry. You got to pick a side at this point. Pick a side. Pick a side. And that's all I got for today, guys. I love you all. Until next time, horns up, peace out. Good night and good luck.